Hello, dear colleagues. I'm delighted to be with you today. I've titled my presentation, A Pedagogical Peek into the Music Studio, Applying Private Music Lesson Pedagogy to Other Disciplines. I feel so privileged to work regularly one-on-one with 11 to 15 of our precious Taylor students every week in my piano studio. I get to know them in a more personal way than I would in the classroom. We get to talk about expressing the full range of human emotions through artful music and how to handle the crucible of the performance stage, which for pianists can be a particularly lonely act. I think music students come to see their instructors as adults they can confide in and with whom they can share what is going on in their lives. I am blessed indeed. I believe applied lesson teaching is unlike virtually every other type of teacher-student educational setting on campus, apart from an independent study with a single student or private tutoring. It grows out of a master-apprentice tradition in which the student needs individual attention to hone their particular gifts and can witness how the master undertakes his or her craft. The difference in private lessons is that the student is not working alongside the master on a daily basis, but only 1 hour per week, which presents its own challenges. I'm hoping you, my colleagues, will be able to take some of the pedagogical principles I have found to be effective in the private studio and apply them to your own fields and classrooms. I myself teach in both modes, applied lessons and music theory classes and labs, and am constantly looking for opportunities to make connections between the two. I've become a better teacher by continuing to learn and perform piano music and by reflecting on my own deficiencies and those I inherited from my early training. I strive to understand those deficiencies so I might overcome them as much as possible and not pass them on to my students. I have thought a great deal about the kind of teachers I wish I had had as a young student and have endeavored to become that kind of teacher myself. I'd encourage you to reflect on the teachers you found most effective and engaging as a student. What was it about their teaching that made such an impact on you? My self-reflection resulted in a conference presentation I did several years ago, which I titled 10 Things I Wish My Early Piano Teachers Had Taught Me. You might want to retitle your reflection as 10 Things I Wish My Physics or English or Math or Art or Business Professors Had Taught Me. What follows are some of those ideas which we can apply to teaching in general. So number one, a good pedagogue makes no assumptions about what a student already knows. As a very passive, trusting learner, I started piano at age 4, I assumed that the teacher would tell me everything I needed to know. If they didn't tell me something, I must not need to know it. I'll give you a quick example from a class. The student had already taken our fundamentals theory class 101, and I mentioned something about, when you're trying to figure out an interval, well, you just count up the alphabet. If you're wondering, is A to E a fourth or fifth or sixth, you just count up the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, or it's a fifth. And he stopped me and asked, do you mean when you go up the alphabet, it's like going up the keyboard from left to right? That's such a basic principle that, should have been covered on day one, but he hadn't, someone assumed he knew that, and he had taken the fundamentals course and he didn't know that. But I just said, yes, that's correct. I didn't make any faces or look appalled, but it struck me again, wow, we cannot assume they know anything that we haven't told them. So I just said, yeah. We make assumptions about what our students already know at our peril. Many of our students at Taylor are very trusting young people. They come from great homes and have learned to be very respectful of elders and authorities. They may be quite passive as learners, trusting us to tell them in our classes everything they need to know. We dare not assume they already know the basic concepts of our field. Number 2, there are many different aspects to learning and performing music. For example, reading notes and rhythms, technique, which is the physical mechanics of playing an instrument or singing, developing one's ear or ear training, studying music theory, music history, learning how to memorize music, and of course, performance and what kind of mindset one wants to be in when performing. Many disparate aspects to music. As a passive learner, exacerbated by a graded music exam system in Canada, I learned all of these components of music as separate entities. For example, I had a different teacher for piano than I had for the various levels of music theory, rather than one teacher for all these components of music. I would practice all my scales and chords, but not integrate them with the repertoire I was learning. What I needed was someone to help me make connections between all these different aspects of music, getting me to think more holistically and showing me how to look for these connections in the music, which is a huge part of critical thinking. For example, if I played a wrong note, I knew that I had, but I didn't know how to avoid it the next time it came around. I would keep making the same mistake repeatedly, leading to extreme frustration. I needed a teacher who didn't just correct that individual note, but who could help me understand why I played that wrong note and why that wrong note didn't make sense in that context. To move from random, isolated information to making sense of that information through understanding its place within a larger context. Without getting too technical, I needed to understand what key that music was in, the set of notes I was working with, and what the harmonic context of the music was at that moment. I also needed to integrate my ear into the process to anticipate how that wrong note would clash with surrounding pitches. So I believe we need to help students think more holistically about our fields. Don't assume they are seeing connections you take for granted. Reflect on how you first made those connections as a student. Explain to them how the new information you are presenting relates to what they already have learned. Number 3, in private lessons, we see the student for 1 hour a week, and the rest of the week they are, presumably, practicing on their own. One of my main jobs is to train them how to practice, how to get the notes into their heads and fingers so they can recall them fluently in memorized performance, often at breakneck speed. For practicing to lead to improvement, the student needs to learn to assess and think critically about their own playing in the practice room. First, to realize that they have made a mistake, then to find exactly where that error occurred, and finally, to know how to improve that passage. I spend much of the piano lesson teaching students how to practice so they can make progress on their own throughout the week. And a question for you, do your students know how to study on their own? How to internalize the material you present in class to make it part of the way they think about your discipline? Have you given them ideas about how to do this, how to study your material? Number 4, learning music also involves finding ways to simplify a passage, how to learn it in stages from the simple to the complex. We might call pedagogical sequencing. Piano music can be very complex indeed, with many events taking place at the same time. For example, we might need to isolate the rhythm of a passage and just clap that first on its own without playing any notes. We might need to play one hand at a time, or even play one hand's part with both hands. We often play a series of consecutive notes as a blocked chordal unit, playing all the chord tones of an accompaniment pattern at one time. Another way to simplify a texture would be to leave out one of the parts. For example, in a waltz, the melody is in the right hand and the left hand is sort of a boom, chick, chick, bass note, upper chord, upper chord. If a student's struggling putting all those components together, I will have them leave out one of those parts. For example, the chick, chick. So they're just playing the melody with the boom, boom, 2, 3. And yeah, just doing that and accomplishing, the baby step before moving on to the more advanced step is a great pedagogical principle in private lessons. Are there ways you could simplify your presentation of complex material or present a basic framework before filling in the details? I think as academics, we get excited about the details and sometimes plunge right into that without setting up the basic framework first. Does your pedagogical sequencing need reassessing? Textbooks don't always get it right. Sometimes we just follow the order of the material in the textbook. I found that sometimes I have to move something later in the chapter to earlier in the chapter before we get to the middle part of the chapter. It just doesn't seem to work the way it's presented in the textbook. So something to think about. And finally, I believe it is my duty to discern how my students' minds work, where they are in their musical development, and what repertoire and technical exercises I need to assign them to help them achieve that next level of mastery. I have reflected on my deficiencies and performance errors to the point that when a student makes a mistake while playing, I can practically tell them what their own thoughts were at that moment and why they had a problem at that spot. Obviously, in the classroom, we cannot know how each student's mind is working, but we can learn much about students' mindsets as a generation, as a culture. We have had many excellent BCTLE and college speakers to help us understand how student culture and learning have changed over the years. They are not as we were as students. Are we adapting our pedagogy to reach them today? And in summary, maybe I will share this screen. Reflect on how the best pedagogues in your student life taught their material and how you might emulate some of those same qualities in your own teaching. Also, reflect on the deficiencies of poor pedagogues you have had and seek to avoid those shortcomings you may have inherited so as not to pass them on to your students. Do not make assumptions about what your students already know, but be sure to cover the basics even at the expense of seeming a bit pedantic to some of the brighter students. Reflect on how you first learned basic concepts in your field. Then find ways to state the same foundational principles in multiple ways from different angles, since not everyone learns as we do. Be creative. Encourage and help students to make connections between various aspects of your discipline. Do not assume they will figure these out on their own. Teach your students how to practice or how to study the material efficiently on their own, so it becomes deep, not superficial learning. Try to discover how their minds work, including false presuppositions they may have that need to be knocked down. And finally, be a fellow learner alongside your students. Stay professionally active. when I'm practicing towards a performance, I'm a better teacher because I am in the mode of actively practicing the way I want my students to practice. I guess you could say I strive to practice what I preach. So I hope some of these thoughts will trigger ideas in your own mind that you could apply to your own field. And I thank you very much for your time.